and welcome to today's webinar. I'm really excited for this. I want this to get very interactive and have you guys ask any questions you might have at all. My name is Liz Wessel. I'm the co-founder and CEO at WayUp. And I'm going to share for a minute why I happen to know the most common reasons that people watching, that your friends, your colleagues are getting rejected from interviews. And so I'll share why we know it. Then I'm going to share what it is. I'm going to share how to actually avoid that from happening to you. And then I want to answer questions live. So we will definitely ask you to ask away. So with that, hopefully you guys can see my screen. Can someone just give like a thumbs up in the chat that you guys can see the screen okay? Or I guess you can't do a thumbs up. Yeah, okay, thank you so much. All right, so we're gonna be going through how to avoid the most common interview mistakes. I'm really excited for this. So just really quickly, nice to meet you. Again, my name is Liz Wessel. I'm the co-founder and CEO of WayUp. Really quickly, if you don't know WayUp, you can go to wayup.com and learn more. But essentially at WayUp, we help college students and recent graduates get hired. We help in a bunch of different ways, from a ton of content. If you haven't seen all of the guides, I'll make sure my team sends in this chat a link to some of our guides that have interview best practices, videos about how to answer these questions that you've probably gotten before, all kinds of information. But what I will tell, and there's the link right there, but what I will tell you is we actually also conduct interviews on behalf of our clients for many of them. So there are lots of clients of ours, lots of companies out there, employers, top employers in the country, who will literally say, we're going to have WayUp do your first round interview. And if you pass that first round interview, you'll make it to a final round interview. Now, don't think we just make up what we want to interview for. They tell us what they want us to ask, and we ask the questions that they tell us, and then they decide if you're going to pass or not. But ultimately, what I will tell you is, we listen to the interview and then we give soft skills feedback to every candidate. And we never fail a candidate because of any of the soft skills issues that they might have. But we started to see a lot of trends around why candidates might struggle a little bit with interviews that aren't conducted by WayUp, where you are kind of getting knocked for some of those soft skills issues. So I'm going to dive right in and share some of the most common interview mistakes, as well as actually going right into talking about how to nail your interview, how to stand out. So top reasons candidates fail their interviews. I want to start by just asking you guys what you think it is. So go ahead and in the chat, I'd love to just see, feel free, you don't have to write a proper sentence, just plug it in right there. What do you think are the most common reasons candidates fail their interviews? Lack of confidence, no company research, shaky tone, not researching the company, unprepared, lack of research, sloppy answers, using words like like, so, not asking questions, punctuality. Oh, you guys are setting it a lot. Nervousness, no eye contact, rejection at the application. That's a good one too. Not being confident. Great. You guys did a great job. So some of these are certainly nailing it. So the very, very number one reason that companies will actually reject a candidate, you might be perfect for the job, but if you don't show enough enthusiasm, then you're not going to get it, most likely. The number one thing that companies will walk away with and say is, did you really want the job? You did this whole interview, but did you really want it? And I'm going to tell you, I know it might seem silly, like, why would you apply for a job if you didn't want it? Of course I wanted it. But I'm going to actually walk you through some tricks and some tips for how to make sure that the company walks away saying, okay, this person really did want it. So I'll get there in the next section. The next one is, maybe you weren't so well researched. Now, don't get me wrong. I have a feeling if you're on this webinar right now, then you probably are a type A, super on top of it, ambitious person. And so you probably are thinking, of course I research everything. But did you show that you were researched? I'm going to talk to you about some tips for how to make sure you show it, because this is the number two reason that candidates get rejected in interviews. Number three, you just didn't make a good first impression. I'll talk to you a little bit about some ways to make a really good first impression, but really simple things like how you answer the phone could potentially ruin your entire chances of everything that happens after with some interviews. Now, I know that sounds crazy. With our team, when we're interviewing, I don't care how you answer the phone. We're going to give you tips in the future on how to answer it better, but that's not going to affect how you get through our process. But for some companies that don't work with WayUp, they might just interview you. And if you answer the phone with a ton of music blasting and you answer and you say, hello, I can't hear you, something like that. And then you maybe hang up, or maybe even worse, you just don't even answer the phone the first time and then they have to call back 7 minutes later and then you answer the phone. That can really hurt a first impression. And some hiring managers or recruiters are just not willing to look past that. The third is that you're really hard to follow. I think a few of you actually listed this in your reasons, and it's absolutely correct. Whether you're using lots of acronyms, you're referring to organizations that you're part of that they've never heard of. The next, you just didn't have enough relevant experience. Now, it's interesting because this one isn't number 1 or number 2, and I'm talking to college students and recent graduates or people who are looking for entry-level work. Now, it might seem weird that someone would not get a job for an entry-level position for not having enough relevant experience if this is entry-level. But we all know that there's this whole chicken and egg problem of like, well, every entry-level job must require 10 years of experience. The good news is it's not actually true, especially if you are on WayUp.com. Every single job is meant for entry-level candidates. But what I will tell you is that ultimately, often employers are looking for some kind of relevant experience, and it doesn't have to mean that you have to have 10 years of experience. It just has to mean, for example, if it's a sales role, that they want to see that you've been customer facing, just as an example. And so I think that that's one we'll certainly talk a little bit about. And then finally, the next top reason that candidates fail their interviews is, did you really want this job long-term? Is this just a stepping stone? Are you using me? Are you basically using me to get in at my company and then I know you just want to switch over to the sexier team at my company, or maybe you're just trying to get in because, ultimately you don't know what you want to do and long-term you don't want to work for me. Now, this one's really tricky and I'll talk about it a little bit at the end. It's tricky because no one who's in college or recently graduated should know what they want to do for the rest of their lives. I'm 30 years old and I don't know what I want to do for the rest of my life. But if I am applying for a job that's a sales role and I tell the interviewer that I want to be a lawyer, there's a very high likelihood they're going to say, okay, I understand she wants to be in sales for the next 1 to 2 years, but ultimately, I don't think she's going to stay around much longer. And a lot of companies are just not really willing to actually, accept that. So we're going to talk more about a lot of these, specifically in the section of top tips to help you ace your next round interview. Now, I'm going to show you an acronym. It's called REAF, R-E-A-F. I don't know if some of you have heard it before. WayUp actually invented it a few years ago, and I'm really proud of it. And I will tell you that if you remember REAF, and before every interview for the rest of your life, I'm not talking about for early career now, I'm talking about for the rest of your life, if you think about REAF before every interview you go into, R-E-A-F, you will do substantially better, and there is a very, very, very high likelihood that you will pass your first round interview, no matter what the job is. Maybe not if you're applying to be a doctor and you have no medical experience, but other than that, you will do much better. So let's talk about what is REAF. Now, REAF stands for research, enthusiasm, asking questions, and following up. And you're probably looking at this and thinking, rolling your eyes and saying, I know I should do those things. But let me just share with you a little bit about each one of these points that you might not have thought of in the past. So first, on research. Doing a Wikipedia search, didn't realize there was an animation there, I apologize. Doing a Wikipedia search is not enough. Now, Wikipedia is great. I'll admit, I actually love Wikipedia, but often what you want to do is find news on the company. You want to find, what is something I can teach the interviewer? Let me give you an example, a personal one. Before WayUp, I've actually only ever had one job, and it was working at Google. So I'll just give that example. But I remember before my interview at Google, I had enough heads up time. I think I had like 5 days that I went to the local bookstore at my college, and I bought a book all about Google. And I read the entire book start to finish in that weekend because I really wanted the job. And I remember highlighting and taking notes on like interesting things that I hadn't known. During the interview, I was talking to someone, and somehow the logo of Google came up, and I mentioned, oh yeah. And then I mentioned the name of the person who, of course, right now I'm blanking on their name, but the name of the person who actually invented or created the first Google logo. And I mentioned their name, and I said, when insert name, created the first Google logo. And I read all about that in the book, blah, 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 blah. And the person, I remember saying to me in the interview, oh, I didn't even know that that was that person's name. Even if that person hadn't said that, most likely I would say 99.9% of employees at Google do not know the name of the person who designed the first logo. But me showing that I knew the name showed I cared about this job. I wanted this job, and I took the time to do the research. And that's something I cannot encourage you all enough to do. Come with a couple tidbits, memorize them right before the interview if you need to. If you have bad short-term memory, that's okay. Come with a couple tidbits that you can really use to show the interviewer, I did my research. I really know what I'm talking about with this company because I really want to work for you. I will tell you there's two good questions to show that you've done your research. Why do you want to work for my company? And why do you want this role? You should make sure that in your answers to both of those questions that you are including research that you've done. Very rarely in an interview is a company going to say to you, tell me about the research you've done on my company. It happens every once in a while, but usually not. You need to show you've done it in your answers without them asking you, without them waiting for you to tell them. Finally, I will tell you, it's okay to say you've done your research. It's okay to say, I actually spent all weekend learning all about the recent launch of, about how Thermo Fisher created this Nalgene bottle. If you're interviewing with Thermo Fisher, like you can actually tell them you've done your research. It's okay. You don't have to just play hard to get, and we'll get into that in the next section. It's okay to say that you've done research. And in fact, I would say it might even be encouraged. All right. Hopefully that's helped you with some tidbits. And I hope if you'll walk away remembering one thing in this section, it's come with a couple facts about the company that even the interviewer might not know. So, enthusiasm. If you've ever been on a date before, and maybe some of you have, maybe some of you haven't, you know the age-old kind of phrase of like, oh, you got to play hard to get. No one wants someone who's like just kind of begging for you to date them. Interviewing is not a date. Throw that out the window. Enthusiasm. Show enthusiasm. Show that you want the job. Ultimately, this is not the time to play hard to get. So during the actual interview itself, feel free to tell them, I am so excited to be interviewing with you. You can even actually say things to them like at the very beginning, I just want to say before we get started, no matter what happens, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. I've dreamed about working for this company for quite some time. And the fact that I've got an interview, let alone with you, is really exciting. So thank you so much. Do you hear and see how me saying that showed I really want this job? Now, I'm not telling you to be misleading. I'm not telling you you should say that every time, even if you don't actually want the job. Show it with genuine care, and obviously say it if you mean it. But there are things you can do, like thanking them for their time and telling them, because I've really wanted to work for your company, can go a really, really long way, and interviewers notice it. And I promise you, it will not come off as desperate. You applied for the job. They know you're interested in the job. It does not come off as desperate in any way. Now, starting the call with, oh my gosh, I'm dying to work for you, and like this is literally the be-all end-all of my career, that might come off as a little desperate. But thanking them for their time because you're so excited, and explicitly saying those words, you're so excited to be interviewing because you're really passionate about this company, will go a long way. Especially, by the way, with unemployment where it is today, you have a lot of competition. So the thing that could be the make or break between two candidates in early rounds or late rounds is who showed that they wanted it more. Body language also. So if you're on a video, do you see how I'm kind of using my hands and I'm saying I'm really excited to be talking to you guys? I'm smiling throughout most of this webinar, hopefully the whole thing. That shows enthusiasm. Let me show you something that I have seen, no joke, real candidates do in interviews with me. Yeah, so my experience selling, I do a lot of cold calls, and I really like pitching clients. I like telling the story. Do you see how my body language was kind of restricted? I wasn't smiling. My voice was pretty mellow. Now, I know that what I'm doing right now, smiling and being energetic and kind of showing a side of extroversion, it's not everyone's personality, and it might come off as fake. And I'll tell you guys, I actually consider myself an introvert, so it takes a lot for me to want to do this and get up and say, oh my gosh, go. But the fact is that if you think about something you're really excited about, especially if you're not in person, which during the pandemic, most interviews are not in person, you just need to really go the extra mile to show. So be your authentic self, but as much as you can, try to show your enthusiasm. And if you're not the kind of person who can be, you know, showing it with a smile, etc., then think about things you can say to show your enthusiasm. Also, it sounds so silly, but this is a trick that people have in sales actually, which is smile if you're on the phone. So I'm smiling right now because you all can see me. So if you have a Zoom interview or a WebEx interview or whatever, you know, a Ring Central interview, and you're on a video platform, then smile if you can, try to smile. But if you're on a phone call, not a video interview, I encourage you to smile throughout the whole time. It sounds really silly, like why would I smile if no one's actually can see me? But it's really interesting, but people can actually hear your smile, if that makes sense. It sounds really, really weird, but people can hear your smile. And so if you smile, there's a study in sales that if you smile, you'll even perform better as a sales rep. And in a way, if you think about it, interviewing is kind of selling yourself as an employee, as a prospect. And again, at the very bottom of the screen, you see there's nothing wrong with telling them how excited you are. Now, the A in REEF, R-E-A, stands for ask questions. Seems really obvious. Asking questions is like, you know, there are myths out there that are actually true, that there are companies where if you don't ask a question at the very end, when they say, do you have any questions for me? There are myths that are, if you don't have any questions, that they will reject you. And guess what? Unfortunately, there are companies that I know of firsthand that will reject you if you don't have any questions. So just in case you get one of those companies that you're interviewing with, come with some questions. But even better than coming with questions is asking questions that are based on the conversation you had. So for example, based on who the hiring manager is, based on the recruiter, based on who you're interviewing with, ask them about their experiences. Now, even better, like ninja move, if you will, I know that's such a corny phrase, but you know what I mean, advanced level, is asking them throughout the interview. So when they ask you a question, answer it. Don't respond with a question. That's just annoying. But answer the question. But feel free to ask them something back. So if someone says, you know, what skills do you have that you think you'll really bring to the table for this role? Answer the question and then end with, you know, before you go to the next question, I'm just curious, now that I've told you that, like, what are some of the skills that you see really set candidates, it really set your all-stars in this role apart from everyone else? It kind of creates a conversation, and the best interviews are ones that feel like a conversation more than an interview. I'll also tell you, try to stay away from the classic generic questions that a lot of people ask. So for example, if you come with the question of like, maybe it's a startup and you ask the question of what do you see as the 5-year vision for the company? It's like everyone asks that question. So there's nothing wrong with it, but try to also have some questions that are maybe a little bit more unique and a little more specific to either the role that you're applying for, the interviewer that you're interviewing with, and so on. So I hope that's helpful. I will tell you, if you are interviewing with anyone who's not the hiring manager or not the recruiter, don't ask them what are next steps, what's a timeline, what feedback do you have for me? It can really turn off a lot of people. So I highly recommend you keep those for the interviewer, the recruiter, or the hiring manager. The next list is, and I apologize, one second, hold on one second, everyone. I'm gonna just go off share for a second because I think my screen had a slight issue. So the next one that I'm gonna just bring up while I pull this up again is the F stands for follow up. So follow up, and here we go. Sorry everyone, one second. Here we go. Okay. That's what I get for trying to use a monitor. I apologize. So for follow up, okay. All right, hopefully you guys can see my screen. For follow up, I want to talk about a few ways that you can follow up and really stand out. So the first one is sending a thank you note within 4 hours. So this is also a ninja, if you will, or advanced move, but I'm going to give you a little secret into how interviewing goes. So with most companies, whether it's the final round, first round, whatever, when you are interviewing, the recruiter or interviewer is usually taking notes, whether by hand, whether on the keyboard, whatever it might be. At the end of the interview, the interviewer is actually going to go ahead and put a review into what's called an ATS, an applicant tracking system. And they're going to put a review in there, and it's going to go all into one file for you. And that file is your kind of candidate file where it has all the information, your resume, any answers to your application. Every single person who spoke to you is going to usually put notes in there. And so the average time that a company takes to actually submit their review for you is over 6 hours. Meaning you can interview with the person at 9 a.m., but they might be running to another meeting. And so that evening, they might say, I'll just clean up the notes from that interview and then I'll put it in. So here's a kind of ninja advanced trick, if you will. If you send a thank you note within 4 hours of the interview, there's a very high likelihood that the person will receive that note before they actually submit their review. And while usually a thank you note won't really change anything about whether you passed or failed the interview, whether you nailed it or whether you maybe just kind of didn't do so great, if the interviewer is on the cusp, if they're like, they were good, I can't decide if I want to give a thumbs up or not, a good thank you note will often tip the scale, will tip it in your favor. Specifically, what does a good thank you note mean? Like, how do I even say it's a good thank you note? The third bullet point here, have the follow-up note relate to something that was discussed. So for example, writing a thank you note that says, Dear Liz, I just want to thank you so much for the interview today. I really learned a lot and really appreciated your time. I look forward to hearing back soon. Best, Bob. Not a very customized, not a very personalized thank you note. Instead, Dear Liz, I wanted to thank you so much for your time. I can't tell you enough how much I enjoyed learning about XYZ. In fact, I found it really fascinating that ABC happened because I never knew that about your company despite hours of research. Anyway, I know you're swamped, so I just wanted to drop a quick note and thank you again. I really look forward to hearing from you, as I know I would love, as I know I'd be honored to join the team. That's personalized. It's grateful. It shows enthusiasm. It shows research. Kind of checking off a lot of the REAF acronym points, but it also can really help you kind of tip the scale a little bit if they're just in between. Now, I know I often get the question, okay, what if I don't have the email address for the person I spoke to? That's totally fine. And some companies just are not willing to give those emails away. Don't be offended. It's not about you. It's just many companies have that rule. And in that situation, what I would recommend is emailing the recruiter and saying, can you please forward this note along to Liz, who interviewed me today? And they can actually do that for you. The final one, I'm actually going to say this is in a non-COVID world, so please don't listen to this in a COVID world, but in a non-COVID world, if you come in for an interview, actually leaving a handwritten thank you note can go a really long way. But now that we're in a pandemic, I think some people don't want to maybe touch mail that comes from the outside, or they may wait 4 days. And then there's also the whole concept of like, you don't even know wherever it is, and it might seem kind of creepy or stalkerish if you're actually if you're asking someone for their personal home address. So I would say stay away from that for right now. But in a non-COVID world, when you're actually going into the office, I've actually seen candidates, it's pretty impressive, bring thank you notes with them. They'll leave the interview. They'll walk downstairs. I live in New York City and I work in New York City. So they'll walk outside on the street. They'll write a really beautiful thank you note. They'll walk back up, drop it off with the receptionist or the, whoever's working at the very front of the office. And I'll get that thank you note an hour later. And I'll say, this is so amazing. And this clearly was written after because they referred to things we talked about. And that, my friends, is an advanced move, but not one I would recommend during a pandemic. So I want to answer questions about REEF. I do actually want to quickly cover a few other points, and then we'll have the final 25 minutes or so for questions. So other really quick tactical interview tips. When you answer the phone, If you know you have an interview within that 10-minute time frame, just answer the phone. Hi, this is Liz, or whatever your name is. Please don't use Liz if your name's not Liz. But start the call with, hi, this is Liz, or something professional like that. I have actually heard about interviews where people answer the phone, yo, what's up? Maybe, hello. Those are not the most professional ways. And some people, unfortunately, let their first impressions cloud the rest of the interview. And while it's definitely not ideal, it is the way the world works. And it's something you want to avoid. This next one is no background noise. Now listen, we are in a global pandemic. Some people are in homes with like 7 other people in their family or their friends. I get it. Sometimes this is not avoidable. But if you're on a phone call and there's a closet you can lock yourself in that has good reception, go in that closet. Leave the dog out so that there's not a barking dog in the background. But try to avoid having background noise if you can avoid it, because ultimately, some interviewers, again, especially more old school, might really knock you for it. Have a resume, a notepad, and a pen with you. This will especially help you when it comes to them asking about a specific experience they saw on your resume. If you didn't memorize your resume, which no one should memorize their resume, then you might forget one point on your resume or what exact dates you worked there. So it's just helpful to have it in front of you. And then for a notepad and pen, you never know what they're going to ask you about. But also if you're someone who might get nervous, which I think everyone gets nervous, you might want to take some notes so that in that thank you note, you can refer back to some of the notes that you wrote. Maybe they do a case study on the spot. You never know. So I think it's a good place to just jot things down. If you are going in person, which I know is not very common right now during the pandemic, but when we're not in a pandemic, in-person interviews are pretty common. I always recommend showing up 10 to 15 minutes early. I'm not saying earlier than that. And the reason is because they might not have space for you more than 10 or 15 minutes early. It might be really crazy with a bunch of other candidates in there. So I really recommend, even if you get there 30 minutes early, go to the coffee shop downstairs, wait outside, try to wait until 15 minutes. And do not show up late, just whatever you do. If you're someone who, maybe you're in New York and you need to take a subway to get there, everyone knows that subways have delays. So leave 45 minutes earlier than you need to if you can, but really just make sure you show up 10 to 15 minutes early. Dressing the part is another big one. Don't overdress, don't underdress, but if you're going to do one of them, overdress. If you are applying to work at a startup in, maybe a marketing position, there's probably a pretty high likelihood wearing a suit with a tie might be, or a full-out business suit might be a little bit overdressed. And while no company should knock you for this, ultimately some companies have unconscious biases. Actually, everyone has unconscious bias of some kind. And so if you dress the part and you show up and they look at you and they feel like you already look like you could work here, just from even an apparel perspective, it might help. Now, I know that's not ideal. Unconscious bias sucks, but it's a real thing. And so I'll tell you that. I will say, however, there are some companies where a t-shirt and jeans is totally fine. And in that case, I would say dress up a little bit just to show respect. So maybe a button down and jeans in that situation. Or if you're not someone who wears a button down and jeans, maybe it's, a really nice blouse and jeans. But I would just say try to stay away from the t-shirt look for an interview. Bring a resume and notepad or pen, exactly the reasons I said earlier. And then whatever you do, turn your phone on airplane mode and do not pick up, period. You see a call coming in, don't pick up. You shouldn't even be looking at it because it should be on airplane mode anyway. But during that 30-minute or 60-minute period, really have your phone on airplane mode. It's actually wild, but one of the companies we work with, they hire teachers and they had dozens of students show up for final round interviews and actually have their phone ring and answer their phone in the middle of the interview. And those candidates got automatically rejected, which I don't want to happen to anyone watching this. I don't want to happen to anyone, but you know what I mean. Couple other quick tips, how to avoid interviews saying you were hard to follow. Stay away from acronyms. If you were an acronym, just for anyone who doesn't know, is something that, REAF, REEF is an acronym. It stands for, it's letters that stand for a phrase. Stay away from using acronyms. Even if you think everyone knows this acronym, assume no one knows it. Or also for organizations you might be part of. I've heard interviews many times before where someone will say, oh, and I'm part of the organization on my campus. Don't assume anyone knows what means. So actually explain the organization. If someone feels like you don't have enough relevant experience, I'll tell you, you probably do if you applied for the job. Every experience you have can be tied to most jobs. So really try to find a way to come prepared with. Don't think about it on the spot at the interview. You should already have prepared ahead of time. Come prepared with experiences you have that are relevant to the role. So simple example, you're applying for a sales role. Anyone who's ever worked as a babysitter, as a waiter or waitress, as a receptionist, as a sales clerk at a barista, like anything. You've probably upsold people on your services. You've probably, tried to sell babysitting services for maybe slightly more than you would have been paid in the past. Whatever it might be, come with experiences of times you have sold. Even if it's a little bit of a stretch, just try to have some kind of experience. And then how to avoid interviews saying, I don't know that they really wanted this job. That's a really big one we've all heard before, unfortunately. Make sure that when they say, where do you see yourself 5 to 10 years from now, that there's a clear, you're explaining the clear career path between the role you're applying for and where you want to be in 5 to 10 years. Now, you shouldn't lie, right? Lying is just going to, trust me, like you don't want to end up in a job that's not right for you. So ultimately, what I would tell you is connecting the dots for them is great. So for example, if I'm saying I want to start my career in sales and then I want to become a lawyer, they're going to look at you and say, okay, if in 5 to 10 years she wants to become a lawyer, well, law school is 3 years. So ultimately she's going to be in this for 1 or 2 years. And then I'm just like spending all this time training her for her to leave soon after. So instead, I probably wouldn't apply for maybe a sales job to become a lawyer. But if I was, for some reason, maybe I would say, I have always seen myself potentially going into law, maybe in like 10, 15 years. And a big part of law is like selling your story, selling your case. And I know that if I were to go into sales, I'd have to be selling something that's, whether it's hard to sell or whether there's a lot of objection handling. And that's a really key skill that you need in order to be a good lawyer, especially a trial lawyer, like the kind of lawyer I want to be, and so on and so forth. I see your questions coming in, by the way, so I'm going to be switching to questions in a total of 60 seconds. Just really quickly, some quick resume tips. Always make sure your resume is 1 page. There's never an excuse to go longer. Stick to 1 page. Spell check, spell check, spell check. Capitalize every single bullet point. Be as quantifiable as possible. So really try to put numbers to as many bullet points as you can. This is all very tactical stuff. This first word of each bullet point should be the same tense. So for example, if it's a past tense job that you're not in anymore, every first word of each bullet point should be past tense. If it's a job you're currently in, it should be present tense. See that mistake all the time. Margins should all be the same on the resume. Font should all be the same. If you're sticking to Times New Roman, be Times New Roman all throughout. And do not provide personal details like your social security number. That happens a lot. Don't do it. It can cause a lot of problems for the employer. And then also your photo. And by the way, also problems for you. And then photos are usually discouraged unless you're applying for a job as an actress, an actor, a model. Can't really think of many other things that would encourage a picture. Other than that, I would say stay away from a picture. I won't get into all the reasons why, but unless someone really wants to know, but I would just say I highly recommend against it. So those are some of the tactics around resumes. I want to get into your live Q&A. So I'm hoping that we have some folks who might want to go live, but I'm going to just start answering questions that have come in. And so if you want to go live, feel free to press on the Q&A chat and just say, I have a question that I want to, ask live. And we'd love to see your face and hear your voice. So I'm going to go with, I'll start with Betty's question. What if you don't know your 5-year plan? I'm sorry, Betty just submitted it, so I'm just doing recency bias of just asking the first one, the last one that came in, and then I'll switch over to some of the questions that came in earlier. So what if you don't know your 5-year plan? That's a really good question because a lot of people don't. What I will tell you is you don't need to know what you want to do, but saying something like, I really enjoy X, Y, and Z. And I'm young, I'm early in my career, so I don't know exactly what I want to do 5 years from now. But specifically, this job seems really exciting for me because and I'm just turning the slides off. This job seems really exciting for me because I really want to learn how to become better at sales, because I see that potentially I might want to be in sales for the rest of my career. And I don't see why I wouldn't want to be. This seems like a really good career path for me based on the skills that I have and based on the passions that I have and what I enjoy doing. So I don't know exactly what I want to do 5 to 10 years from now, but this is certainly a career path that I wouldn't be applying for this job if I didn't think I wanted to go this route. So really just tie it back to the fact that even if you don't know, that's okay, but that you're excited about this being one of your potential career paths. Now, what does the career path look like for the role that you're applying for? That's a really good question, and that's something you should find out in your research. And if you can't, that's something that you should ask towards the beginning of the interview or one of the interviews. Most companies do a pretty good job of talking about career path on their career site, or you can go on LinkedIn, for example, and look at what a person's background is. But I would say try to tie your answer back to the job you're applying for and make them feel like you at least, you know that you're going to love this job and you don't see any reason why this couldn't be potentially the job you want to stay in. Again, just never lie, but as long as that's somewhat true, especially to the point about that you made, which is you don't know your 5-year plan. Hopefully that is true. I really appreciate everyone who's writing really nice comments, and I'm glad that this is helpful. So thank you guys. Okay, the next question, let's go with Alex from Lafayette College. Said, how has COVID changed best interview practices? What are the differences between an online interview and an in-person interview? I think I've answered a lot of that. What I will tell you, and I've talked, and you probably asked it before I went through it, so I apologize if I covered this after your question. A lot of interviews right now are happening via video, via the phone. And this whole thing that is going on right now, this is more about live interviews versus those recorded interviews, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but we could talk about that another time, and maybe we'll do a session on how to nail those. Although a lot of this, especially the enthusiasm, still stays true. But what I will say is COVID and the economy has resulted in very high unemployment in our country. And so as a result, it is more competitive than it's ever been in most of your lives, or at least in most of your post 16-year-old, I think, is when you can start working. Maybe 14 years old is when you can start working. So in the time you've been all working in the United States, this is one of the hardest times that it has been to get a job. And so what I would just say is really going even more above and beyond to do your research and come prepared. It's more important now than it ever has been. Or at least than it has been in about a decade. Why would you be a good fit for, how do you answer, why would you be a good fit for our company? Good question. So we actually have an entire video template on how to answer that question. And I want to go find that. You guys can go to wayup.com here. We put it in the chat as well. And I want to just make sure, wayup.com/guide. I think that's the actual URL. It might be WayUp. Oh, and someone just put it in there as well. WayUp.com/guide. And it's a whole section on career advice and interview tips. And there should be an entire, under the section for interviewing 101, which is the 4th section. You can scroll down and there's all kinds of how to answer this question, along with videos even around, like, here are examples of how to answer. So I definitely recommend you check that out. But just to answer this directly, quickly as well, why would you be a good fit for our company? I would say a few things to make sure. Number one, show that you did your research in this. So say, well, I saw that your company, so a good thing to always point it to is if you research the company, look for their values, look for their principles, their values. Every company, well, most companies have like 5 to 10 core values or principles that they say, like, this is what our culture is about. And so come prepared by saying, you know, I really resonate with this one value. I resonate with all your values or all your principles, but there's one that I really resonate with, and it's this. And you say what it is. And then you say, and you know, I want to tell you, like, I think I'd be a good fit for your company because I live and breathe that. Let me give you an example of how I do that. And so showing kind of how you think you'd be a good culture fit. And then secondarily, talk about the mission of the company. So maybe if you were applying for WayUp, we are very mission driven. We aim to help college students and recent graduates get jobs. Like, that is so fun and cool and encouraging and awesome. And so ultimately, when people are applying to work at WayUp, I love if they mention some of our principles or values, but I also want them to say, and I also would be a good fit for WayUp because I love the problem you're solving and I'm super passionate about it. And if they can even tell me maybe times that they've tried to get into this on their own, maybe they say, I'm often the person who my friends go to for resume reviews or for interview prep, that kind of thing. It's pretty cool to actually be able to, hear that they've already tried to get into this space on their own. Maybe also you've done research on the space. That's another good one. The next question, oh my gosh, so many good ones. How can we get to the interview stage? How can we get to the interview stage? So how can you stand out enough in your application? I think we talked a little bit about resumes and some of the ways to optimize your resumes. Unfortunately, guys, I hate to say it, but a lot of companies have what's called an applicant tracking system black hole, which means they just kind of let applications sit there for weeks or months and then they never even see it potentially and never get back to you. I think we've all been there and seen that and done that. It sucks. And I'm so sorry. For what it's worth, on WayUp, for most of our jobs, not all, but for most of our jobs, if you apply for a job, you'll actually hear back within 24 hours. And it's purely based on, are you qualified? And you might not know all the qualifications. You probably do if it's usually all in the job description. But very often it's just being true and being honest about your actual, your qualifications in the application and making sure you stick to those resume tips that I went through. One pager, please don't make it more than one page, and spell check, spell check, spell check. There's some stat like that the average recruiter spends 6 seconds on a resume. And often they're just looking at a few core things. It's especially for college students and recent graduates, it's what's your most recent internship experience, the very top of your internships and work experience. So make sure that very top one is the one you want them to look at first, because it might be the only one they look at. Your school, what you studied, they might look at your GPA, but not always. If you have some really incredible awards you've won, I would say think about not putting them at the very bottom. So those are some of the things that they might look at first. What do you do? Jessica from NYU asked a great question. What do you do when you don't know the answer to a question an interviewer asks you? Ooh, that's a good question. You know what I would say? I would say the following. That's a really good question. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. Why don't I take a stab at just sharing a little bit of how I think about this? And then I'd love to get back to you later, or just tell me if I'm misunderstanding. I think that's how I would answer. I know there's a little meta because I did it during this, but I think that's how I would answer. Ultimately, just walk them through. Do not freeze up, go silent, and then start crying or freaking out or hyperventilating. They might even, this happens very rarely, but there are some companies that just ask you questions to get a reaction and just to simply see how you perform under stress. And so stay calm, stay cool, be yourself, be your authentic self. And I would say there's a real likelihood that you might misunderstand the question if you don't know the answer, because most interviews are not trying to be gotcha moments of I'm just trying to get you to, figure something out. Now, if it's a case study, for example, and for anyone watching who doesn't know what a case study is, that's that famous where you might have heard of how many golf balls fit into a school bus or something like that. They don't expect you to know the answer. They want to hear how you think. So show how you think by thinking out loud. It's okay to say, you know what, can I have a minute just to think about this, or 30 seconds just to think about this? And so it's okay to write some notes down on your notepad, think about how you're going to answer, and then talk through it out loud. A lot of the time, interviewers just want to hear, how do you think? And sharing how you think out loud is better than sharing it in here, because no one can hear your brain. Unless someone is a psychic, in which case call me, because that'd be really cool. Okay. This is a good one. Katie from SUNY Albany asked, actually, let me pause for a second. Does anyone want to go on video and ask a question on video? Totally fine if the answer is no. Does anyone want to do it? You can just submit a question right now and just say, I'm in, or something like that. No? Okay, that's okay. All right, so the next one, but I am loving your guys' questions, so keep them coming. The next one is from Katie at SUNY Albany. How do you phrase an answer to a question when you have no experience doing the thing that they asked? Okay, it's a really good question. So I would say what you want to make sure you do is you always want to spin every question that gets asked to you to at least try to make yourself look good. So for example, presumably if you're applying for a job, you guys have taken the time to do research or try to get some experience on the side. So even if you have no experience doing the job, that I think this question in particular is, how do you phrase an answer to a question when you have no experience doing the thing they ask? So let's say the question is like, tell me about a time you've cold called before and it's a sales job, and you've never cold called. What I will tell you is, number one, try to put yourself in a position. I know I'm telling you this now, but try to put yourself in a position for any interview you're going into to get a little bit of that experience. So for example, if I knew that I was interviewing for a job where you have to cold call, maybe try signing up to join, and that's a career you want to take. Maybe see if the fundraising organization at your university is willing to take on a volunteer where you could actually sign up to cold call alumni and ask them for donations for your university, something like that. So my point is, very often you can try to get the experience in whatever career path you want, even in a very informal way, through volunteering, through an extracurricular club, through a small startup or side business you want to start. But let's say you don't have 20/20 hindsight and you don't necessarily know that that was the career path, and you applied and then you got the interview and it's the next day and you don't really have time for that. What I would say is, try to spin it where you think about what are the skills that they're looking for. So maybe the action they're looking for is cold calling experience, but the skill is courage, bravery, articulate. Can you be articulate? Can you answer the phone? Are you okay with rejection? Like, cold calling means you're going to get rejected a lot. I mean, how many of us have gotten a call, said, ugh, go away, stop calling me, and hung up, and that's rejection. And so ultimately, think about the experience that they're asking for with you. Try flipping it on its head and saying, you know what? I don't have a classic sense of, in a classic sense, I don't have experience doing that. However, cold calling is a lot about bravery, courage, dealing with rejection, being articulate. And I have a lot of experience with all of those attributes. Now, not cold calling per se, but let me tell you about an experience I have, or a few experiences I have doing something similar. In every interview you guys go into, look at what the job description says. Read it 10 times before your interview and look at what the skills they're looking for. Look at what the job's going to entail, because there's a very high likelihood during the interview that they ask you about your experience doing those skills. Have you done this job before? It makes sense that they would ask it. I mean, think about it. If you were going to hire someone, wouldn't you like someone who's actually done it once or twice before? Because otherwise, what if they actually hate doing it and they quit on day 2? So ultimately, go in with examples already written down in your head, pre-programmed, about things you've done, maybe in a different context, that are similar. I hope that makes sense, and I hope that's helpful. Thanks, Jessica, for that question. Thanks, Katie, for that question. All right, the next one is from Daphne at John Jay College. Is there a limit on how many questions to ask at the end of an interview? And is it okay to ask questions about what's the work schedule? Great questions. Okay, limit on how many questions. Stick to the time frame of the interview itself. I'll tell you, and I've heard this a bunch of times before, if you keep asking questions and maybe the interview's 30 minutes and you've got 29 minutes left, it's really polite to say, you know what, I know we only have a minute left. I have so many more questions because I'm so excited about this job. Do you mind if I email you, or should I email the recruiter? Ask politely that way. But I can't encourage you enough. Don't go over the time limit, because the interviewer might take that to mean you don't respect their time. Most people in the working world have packed schedules, or maybe if they end the interview at that time, they know that that's their only next 30-minute break to grab lunch. So don't keep going beyond the time limit. Be respectful of their time. You can say at the very end, I have so many more questions and I'd love to ask, should I email the interviewer? Should I email the recruiter? Should I email you? Maybe that's the same person. They'll give you advice on what to do. But I will tell you, ultimately, there's no limit as long as you're sticking with the time frame of the interview itself. In terms of your second half of your question, is it okay to ask questions about what's the work schedule? So yes and no. You don't want to come across as if you're saying, basically, is this a 9-to-5 job? Because if there's a minute more of work, then I don't want to do it. I think I would step back and say, What's the goal of you asking this? If the goal is purely out of curiosity and that's it, I would probably save that for an interview with maybe the hiring manager or one of the colleagues or the recruiter, and just say, hey, you know, I'm just purely curious, and for no reason other than just no one's shared this with me before. What is the typical work hours for this role? Not because I'm trying to limit them, just because I'm curious and no one's talked about it. I would just preface that, because otherwise saying, what are the hours for this job alone might signal something that you might not mean for it to signal, which is, I really only want to work 9 to 5. And there's a lot of companies out there that aren't cool with that. Now, I will tell you, if you are asking because you literally can only work 9 to 5, maybe you are a parent and you need to pick your kids up from daycare at 5 or something like that, then that is absolutely acceptable. Maybe not in your first round interview, maybe in the interview with the hiring manager, to say, you know, I want to be really transparent with you. I, from 5 to 7 p.m. every, you know, day, really need to be offline. I'm happy to go back online at night if there's something I absolutely need, you know, you need me for, of course. Like, I want to get the job done, and I'm signing up to work for you, or hopefully work for you, because I want to get the job done. But ultimately, at night from 5 to 7, I'm going to be completely blocked. Is that okay with you? Is that okay for this role? And I think you don't want to be fired. Like, please don't get fired, guys. You want to be hired for a job that you're qualified for and that you're a good fit for. And ultimately, if for some reason it requires that you actually have to work from 5 to 6 p.m. every night and you can't do that, then you should know that before you accept the job, because you certainly don't want to quit and you don't want to get fired day 2. All right, I'm going to do one more question. You guys have been asking amazing questions, and I'm really sorry that I'm not getting to all of them, but I hope that this has been helpful. Okay. I'm going to go with, oh my gosh, so many. I'm going to go with, okay, this is a good one. What, from Mariama, very cool name, by the way. What if the company or organization that you're applying for does not have a website? That's a really cool one, because there's not that many companies I can think of that don't, but it probably happens all the time. And so I'm assuming you're asking this from a standpoint of, like, it's really hard to do research if there's not much. And so I'll apply this to just, what if there's really nothing to find online? There is almost always something you can find if you really put your mind to it. I know I'm biased because I used to work at Google, but Google's a really powerful tool. So what I would say is, it might not be about the company. Maybe the company's a day old, but look up the founder, look up the CEO, look up the hiring manager, go on LinkedIn. It's a great tool for, ultimately, I was going to say stalking, but please don't use it to stalk. That's creepy. But it's a great tool for researching people. And so go and look at their presence online. Google that person. It doesn't have to be just about the company. It's okay to show that you've done research about the person. It's totally acceptable. There are some companies out there that are in stealth mode, which means that they're totally confidential and quiet. My friend just went to work at a startup that's like run by a CEO who's like super, super famous, but it's totally, you can't find anything about them online. They're not even allowed to put their LinkedIns on there. So she was asking me, they're not even allowed to put the job on their LinkedIn. So she was asking me, how do I research this company? How do I research the people? I don't even know who works there. And so what I said is, well, do you know who the recruiter is and who the first round interviewer is? And if you don't know the first round interviewer, ask for their name. And just say you just want to, know to come prepared. And then the CEO is super famous, so go and research them. Look at interviews they've done recently, and there might be some interviews. Another tip, by the way, that I really encourage everyone to do is go into Google Alerts. I feel like I'm a commercial for Google right now. Go into Google Alerts, and you can set up a Google Alert that will send you every day a digest of every time that company was actually mentioned in the news. And so then in like the week or 2 weeks leading up to the interview, you'll know about every single kind of time that they're in the press. And if they're a big enough company, which I know doesn't apply to this question, but if they're a big enough company, then you'll actually be keeping up to date on interview tips, on research and news that come out about that company, so that if you show up for the interview, they're not going to surprise you when they talk about the fact that they got acquired yesterday. You already know that. All right. Well, I am so sorry that that is all the time I have for you, but I want to be respectful of your time, just like you will be of interviewers. And I want to end on time. And so I just want to thank you all on behalf of WayUp, on behalf of my team. We're so grateful that you joined. Please, please, please feel free to go to wayup.com, check out jobs. I hope that if you see a job you like, that you apply these interview tips to your actual interview. And to everyone, I just really wish you the best of luck. This is a crazy hard time to be applying for jobs, but if you've been on this webinar, you're clearly doing the right thing. So keep up the great work, and thank you.